Thanks for coming out. Thanks to the University of the West Indies, the Institute for Caribbean Studies. Thanks for bringing me out here. It also coincided with my mom's birthday, so tell her happy birthday. I was just saying happy birthday, but she'll die of embarrassment. And thanks for inviting me to do this lecture. It's a great honor, even outside of the context. It's great to be back here for such a great reason, and especially, given that I became a writer on this campus. John Hearn was a fantastic creative writing teacher, and funny enough, I remember the time I gave him my worst story, and I think he said something like, I think I was going to fix it, and he was like, no, you can't fix the dead. You can't dress it up all you want, you're just going to end up with a really pretty corpse. And John Hearn, again, one of the great lights of Jamaican fiction that I don't think we read enough. I could go on the list of that, but I'll leave that for the end of the lecture. So I'm actually giving a kind of two lectures. I want to talk about, as the program says, how and why. And how this novel came into being, how Marley became a sort of spiritual force that guided it, because it didn't start out that way. What you should know before I even go further is that the very first page I wrote in this novel is now on page 458, which should give you an idea of the crazy genesis of this book. But my experience of Bob Marley, I realized, came through a series of news reports. News that he's a star, interviews on TV, news that he was shot. Something I remember as much for the content as I did for the voice. I think it was Charles Lewin on JBC that announced it. The news that he was sick. The news that it looks hopeless. The news that it suddenly looks hopeful because of a skin graft. The news that it was hopeless again. The news that it might be hopeful because he's in Germany. And then the news that we lost him. And I realized that all that I knew about him, including the end, the funeral that was live on TV, the Bob Marley funeral is a lot like, oh, where were you when Kennedy got shot? Everybody remembers where they were during the funeral, even if it was in front of a television. And I was 10 years old at the time. The legacy of Bob Marley, the copies of legend that is in every frat house in every university in the world. And I realized I never knew the man. And 700 pages later, I still don't know him. I don't think I've captured him, because that's Bob Marley for you. One of the great things about him is that he uses his voice to turn you to the issues of the day. So as soon as he gets your attention, he switches your focus. It's to what's really important. So much trouble in the world. So much that even in death, Marley's still pointing at what we should really be looking at. Checking the real situation, as he would say. It's one of the reasons why my book ended up being 700 pages. I'm trying to look at Marley saying, brethren, no, you need to look at this. Even past death, past transition, the singer never loses the power to focus an argument. What's funny is that Marley was one of the last elements of this novel. As I said, the first page that I wrote is now on page 458. And that should give you an idea not just of the crazy genesis of this book, but also what happens when a cultural icon takes shape in your own work. This was actually supposed to be my shortest novel. In fact, it was supposed to be a novella. I was going to write a crime fiction and wanted to write this short story about this Chicago hitman on an assignment to kill a Jamaican drug dealer, but distracted by baby mama drama. Or something like that. It wasn't even set in Jamaica, it was set in Chicago, and then Miami. It was set in the 80s, and that's another thing I realized in writing, that I write towards knowing. I write towards figuring out what I'm going to write about. I jump on a laptop and I begin writing, and eventually I hit that moment, that sentence that character that makes me know that, yes, this is it, I'm writing a novel now. Colin McCann, the Irish novelist, says he doesn't write what he knows, he writes towards what he doesn't know in order to know it. Joan Didion says we write to discover what we think. I do both, but I didn't know how I felt about the story until I started writing it. I didn't know how to write a story until I began to write it. And that's kind of my process. It was 500 pages into my second novel that I realized that this novel was utter crap and I need to stop. And I started a new book, which became the Book of Night Woman. 50 pages into some really good Jane Austen English, I realized that it was a slave narrative told by a slave in patois. And if you know about my writing with that book, you know that I fought that character the entire way. For all sorts of reasons, including as a Jamaican having a certain shame about using patois. It's broken English, as if somebody needs to fix it. So I realized in the writing of this book, 50 pages into writing Night Woman, that's when I hit upon this character, Lilith, who wasn't even supposed to be a main character in the book. She just took over it. So here I thought that with my Chicago hitman, I started writing this novel. I ran into a dead end on page 50. And I thought the solution was that I just need to create another character. So I switched from him to a teenage gunman named Bam Bam. As in water, Bam Bam, Bam Bam, Bam Bam. So Bam Bam grew up in this absolutely wretched Bacawal era Kingston. A sort of ghetto existence only to watch his life get worse. Here is a boy born into poverty and violence whose life becomes just that. No pleasure but meanness, like that misfit in Flannery O'Connor's story, A Good Man is Hard to Find. No chance to change, no redemption, no hope. And I still only got to 45 pages. I just didn't know whose story this was. So I said it to my friend Rachel, who sadly passed away before the book came out. And I said, I don't know whose story this is. And she said, what makes you think it's one person's story? When last have you read As I Lay Dying? And As I Lay Dying, William Faulkner's fifth novel, which tells a story of basically a character watching her own coffin being made. And it's told in the perspective of different characters, all in the first person. And I don't really have a lot of eureka moments, but that was a eureka moment for this book. Because I realized a lot of things that one voice can never tell Jamaica. In fact, there are around 15 different Jamaicas in Jamaica, which is funny for such a small island. And that story, whatever it was, and I still at that point didn't know what it was, could never be told by just one person. And even then, Marley was still not a part of the novel. But politicians were, and gunmen were. And in 1976, you really couldn't have one without the other. In fact, Marley didn't enter this novel until I realized that what I really wanted to talk about was 1976. Right before and right after. How did we get to that point, and who was responsible? Coincidentally, here we in an election year, like 1976, and we're still asking some of those same questions. But more on that later.